Okay, welcome to our final presentation of the school year. Let me introduce Colonel Forbes. He graduated from the Royal Military College in 2001, and owing to a training delay, he traveled to Australia to complete a master's degree. Following training, he piloted Griffon helicopters with 427 Special Operations Aviation Squadron. In 2010, he deployed as part of Canada's Special Operations Task Force in Kandahar, flying Russian-built Mi-17 helicopters. Colonel Forbes was then posted to 408 Tactical Helicopter Squadron, where he deployed as a detachment commander to the Philippines as part of Canada's humanitarian response to Typhoon HAIYAN. Following Staff College, Colonel Forbes worked on national defense policy in Ottawa. He later served as the commanding officer of 408 Tactical Hell Squadron, and he was assigned as the executive assistant to the commander of the Canadian Joint Operations Command, and once promoted to his current rank as Director of Continental Operations. Most recently, Colonel Forbes was commander of one wing. Colonel Forbes holds a BA in history from RMC, a master's in international relations from Bond University on the Gold Coast, just south of Brisbane, and another in defense studies from the Canadian Forces College. Colonel Forbes is a graduate of the Canadian Army Staff College and the Canadian Armed Forces Joint Command and Staff Program. Despite wearing blue, I think his heart is olive drab.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, Lies in the Skies. It's a provocative title, which will hopefully not undercut what we already understand and generally widely believe to be the case regarding the drone warfare evolution. We've talked about me, mainly an Army aviation background by any other name. In Canada, it's grouped within the Royal Canadian Air Force since the 1970s, but most of my time was spent on Army bases. So a bit of a preamble first. So I'd like to first off thank Dr. Michael Zeus Murphy for the name. I was trying to find something catchy, and he's been spending a lot of his time reading Dr. Zeus bedtime stories. So Lies in the Skies. So why this topic? I came into this time at the VDF as a visiting defense fellow with this a bit of an irritant in the back of my brain, seeing things in media, seeing things across YouTube and social media and discussions around this supposed revolution in warfare, a revolution in military affairs brought about by autonomous systems, semi-autonomous systems, and drones sort of writ large. And I know that there's something not quite right in there. There's a lot to it. There's a lot to it, but it's not hitting the whole nail on the head. It's not telling the whole story. So 2 months ago, this presentation was this equivalent presentation was done by my colleague Lieutenant Colonel Nick Curry from the 101st Airborne. Adapt or be outflown, regarding the adoption of drone systems. 100% true, all of it. I couldn't agree any more with what he wrote about the complexity and the urgency to get after this problem. But rapid change also creates fog. The necessity for critical thought to fight through that is glaring to me. Non-traditional sources have to be leveraged in order to do this. We need to triangulate our understanding of that. Because this is happening so fast, the measure, countermeasure, the lesson learned, lesson identified, lesson learned, lesson actioned loop is turning so quickly in modern conflict that peer-reviewed academic analysis of what's happening can't possibly keep up. And therefore, a lot of the sourcing for the research that I did was actually from things like YouTube and first-person reporting and interviews with people on the ground and working these problems of working with drones and adapting to the drone-infested battle space. Now, there's a minefield to that, and that's parochialism. So I'm a tactical helicopter pilot. The first thing that everybody thinks about replacing with uncrewed systems is helicopters, right? So the risk is that what you're looking at right now is a horse cavalryman in 1914, right? Facing off against indirect fires, artillery, wide open terrain, fields of no man's land, raked with machine gun fire, right? We did episodic use of horses since then, but nothing really worthy of note. So there's a chance that I'm wrong about this, but I don't think so. But I'm actively working my way through that bias. So uncrewed systems have, and they will make things more expensive and more complex, not easier and cheaper. That's part of the underlying theme of what I'm trying to get to here. So my thesis is effectively this. Drones have changed warfare, but they have not made tanks, helicopters, ships, artillery, or aircraft wholly obsolete. The most important battlefield adaptation is not simply adopting drones, which is not a simple problem. It's learning how to fight, maneuver, and survive and sustain in a drone-saturated environment. The central thesis is drones represent an evolution in warfare, not a revolution. Their greatest impact may be that they force militaries to develop layered, integrated counter-drone capability, and that counter uncrewed aerial systems, not uncrewed aerial systems alone, is becoming the key to tactical success. There's a number of false understandings out there I've kind of alluded to. One of them is drone strike efficiency, which we'll talk about. How many drones does it actually take to affect targets, especially hardened targets? How many drones actually get through? When they do, how effective are they? Whether that's for reconnaissance or for movement or for casualty evacuation. Another false understanding, I believe, is that drones will remain cheap. That they'd offer novel effects and aren't just a repackaging of things we already do and already understand. It's commonly believed that no fundamental, reliable defense against drones exists or will exist. And that, as I've said, that vulnerability is making legacy platforms, expensive, exquisite, bespoke military product, obsolete. And then finally, there's an idea out there that drones function better than missiles, aircraft, artillery, or transport vehicles. Now that said, they certainly matter. Why do drones matter? Well, they're relatively cheap. They're widely available. They're expendable, adaptable. They're easily modified within boundaries of regulatory compliance that Ukraine doesn't have to pay attention to. We certainly do. But overall, easy to modify, capable of surveillance, targeting, attack, a wide range of effects required in the battle space. And they're useful against more expensive platforms. There is an asymmetry there. There is a value proposition of using a $5,000 drone against a $5 million vehicle. Absolutely there is. And that does happen. That does work. Not listed here is another one that is important, is that they're capable of saturating defenses, allowing exquisite systems through. Well, that's a great attribute to have. If an integrated air defense system is able to stop expensive multi-million-dollar cruise missiles, well, wouldn't it be great if we were able to saturate that to increase the chances that the one that gets through is the most capable one and the one that you actually want to use? So there is a value to drones. So don't take away for a second that I disagree with Lieutenant Colonel Curry and that we need to adopt them, and we need to adopt them at scale and increase the pace. An example of this is that Ukraine has used, obviously, drones extensively against Russian armor, infantry, logistics, and artillery in the close and deep fight. Houthi forces have used drones and missiles to hold major warships at risk in the Red Sea, and they've done it for years. Drones allow smaller or weaker forces to impose cost on larger conventional militaries, and they'll all be able to do that, and they'll be able to do that more asymmetrically now than ever. Imagine Afghanistan if the Taliban's IEDs could fly. The main point is that the case for drones is compelling and obvious. They give militaries an economy of force. They can attrit, fix, observe, and harass enemy at scale, and no modern military can afford to ignore them. But to acknowledge their value is not the same as accepting that they can replace conventional combat power. They cannot. The limitations of drones. So a big one is connectivity. Unless and until we're willing to accept full autonomy in the sensor to shooter, sensor to effector kill chain, and allow our robot to go off and make those decisions, and there no doubt are lots of people, lots of groups, lots of states in the world that would accept this. Unless you're willing to accept that, and that brings with it its own set of moral, ethical, but also technical and effectiveness challenges, connectivity will remain a vulnerability to drones. Line of sight, satellite link, fiber optic, and other means of controlling and receiving data from these things will remain a vulnerability. Training and the actual skills and ability, as well as the vulnerability of the operators. If we have trouble shooting down drones, maybe we just track back to where they came from and we'll put a bomb on them instead. Job done. There is an inherent fragility. At the end of the day, these are derived largely from toys, or the technologies and the systems that are embodied in them are derived from cheap plastic 3D printed things. That's part of their value. They're susceptible to weather problems to a higher degree than crewed systems that have large jet engines and anti-ice capabilities for flying in freezing rain, etc. Moreover, the countermeasures are improving. Jamming, spoofing, cyber attack, disruption of satellites, as we've just seen recently with Starlinks turning off of Russian Starlink terminals. Made all the Ukrainians register their terminals, and then they just turned off all of the rest of them. And that caused an enormous operational and strategic impact to Russian forces, not only in the drone space, but certainly there, but also in their just generalized command and control. And as I said, targeting of operators and control nodes. Hardening against those, making better drones, just makes those drones more expensive, reducing that economic asymmetry, that economic value of using drones in the first place. Better navigation, adding autonomy potentially, counter jamming, survivability, larger warheads, longer range, active defenses, a drone's ability to fight back against the things that it's trying to hit, things that are trying to hit it. As those complexities are embodied onto drones, those drones become ever larger because that's weight. They also become more expensive and less expendable. Then what's the point? Our countermeasures are improving. Drones initially exploit gaps in defense, but militaries adapt. As counter-UAS improves, the cost-benefit advantage will shrink. It leads us to some harsh realities. Drones are not full substitutes. They lack a long-range drone is effectively a poor man's cruise missile. It is less stealthy, slower, more vulnerable, and carries a lower payload. An anti-armor first-person video drone, video of this is all over the internet. They're effectively a poor, less effective anti-tank guided missile. Strike efficiency has been overstated at all tiers. A quadcopter is not an attack helicopter. So drones can deliver effects, but they do not replicate the full flexibility, survivability, judgment, imagination, and persistence of crewed platforms. Drones are powerful because they are useful, cheap, and numerous, but they are vulnerable, dumb, and increasingly subject to countermeasures. They impose cost, achieve stalemate, and enable traditional tactical, operational, and strategic activities, but are not decisive weapons in their own right. So the evidence suggesting that the major platforms, tanks, artillery, helicopters, warships, and other things, fighter aircraft, is available if you know where to look, if you understand what's happening, if you're observant. If tanks and helicopters didn't exist, the Ukrainians would drop them like hot rots. There is no room for dead weight in that fight on that side of the line, and they're not. They're asking for more helicopters, more tanks, more aircraft, and more ammunition for all of the above. Other major world militaries who are smart people are doing this as well. Israel is buying brand new AH-64 Echo Apache attack helicopters, as is India. The United States continues to invest in attack helicopters, though they're changing their balance as a result of the onboarding of drones. Navies continue to build warships, Canada included. Air forces continue to invest in high-end aircraft. Ukraine continues, as I say, to ask for high-end platforms at as fast a rate as countries are willing to give them. Why this matters? Well, these decisions are being made by militaries with access to current battlefield lessons, not only in Ukraine, but elsewhere as well. They do not suggest that drones are irrelevant. They suggest that drones are being integrated into conventional force structures, not replacing them. And I've used attack helicopters. I mentioned the AH-64 Echo, the Apache Guardian, the latest iteration. I've used that as a case study in my paper because attack helicopters are often said to be vulnerable to drones themselves, in addition to be most easily replaced by drones. But they remain useful for deep attack, anti-armor, armed reconnaissance escort, and mobile firepower. And increasingly, very promisingly, in the direct counter-drone role itself. Indeed, the new Apache, its radar is capable of burning drones out of the sky without modification, and they're looking to expand that capability. Indeed, the Hellfire missile, commonly used against armored vehicles, is also highly effective against drones. The cost gap isn't as advantageous, but we're getting close. Their dumb rockets, however, which cost about $2,500 a piece, the 2.75-inch rocket, and it's been around for about 70 years, now has a guidance package, laser guided, and to which they are now adding a thermal imager. And that brings the cost down to about $20,000 to $25,000, which is $10,000 less than an Iranian Shahed drone. Meanwhile, they are now testing and have just put into production proximity fused ammunition for their 30mm cannon, which now brings us down to the hundreds of dollars per drone per drone kill. So there's actually a compelling argument for the adaptation of legacy systems in the counter drone role, which I put to you remains more important than the drone role itself. The future of drones is not drones instead of major platforms. It's major platforms adapted to operate with and against drones. So counter uncrewed aerial systems as the decisive adaptation of this overall evolution. The core claim is that counter UAS is less glamorous than drones, but it is in fact more important. So why does it matter? Any adversary can acquire drones that can achieve some effect against you. Any one of them. From criminal actors, terrorists, right down to lone wolves. The side that can survive enemy drones and maintain initiative and keeps maneuvering gains and maintains that advantage. Without counter uncrewed aerial systems, drones impose paralysis, as we have seen effectively on both sides in Ukraine. With counter UAS, drones become effectively just another threat to manage on the battle space. Not unlike the advent of the machine gun, and then later the tank, and then later the anti-tank guided missile, and then later the attack helicopter. So counter uncrewed aerial systems is not a single solution. It is in fact a layering of multiple solutions that must be affected concurrently. So across passive measures, a lot of this isn't rocket science. Camouflage and concealment, thermal signature reduction, light discipline, track discipline. Track discipline means, for the gray hairs in the room, track discipline means where you're living isn't just a spider web of broken grass and branches. Everybody moves in the same direction around a bivouac or around a trench line on a single track to not attract the attention from drones flying by or aerial observation. These old school force-on-force, Cold War and prior era tactics and effectively acculturated behaviors in small units up through formations, they matter again. Hardened positions with overhead cover, the use of decoys. The Ukrainians are quite effective at this. Inflatable tanks are the rage again to signal a different intent than you may wish to put across, as well as attriting and consuming the enemy's munitions, and in this case, drones. Dispersion, standoff is another. Vehicle modifications, nets, and overhead protection. So I offer you examples in the bottom here of the often discussed turtle tank. You'll see early modification of Russian armor, especially with effectively sea containers welded on top of tanks. Unfortunately, that reduces its firepower and its observation and mobility substantially. One on the far left is from your view, is quite interesting. They're calling these porcupine tanks, and what that is steel cable, like a tramway or a gondola cable, welded on one end and then unspun to create a wide bloom of steel tines capable of, one, interdicting quadcopters, one-way effector drones, but then also surviving the resulting explosion should the munition detonate, and they just spring around, really turning out to be quite effective. And then in the center, all the tiles you see attached to that tank, that's been around since the 1970s, explosive reactive armor. So that is a sheet of explosive. Each tile is a sheet of explosive that on impact will detonate outward and absorb the blast or counter the blast of the incoming munition. And that's existed since the 1970s, targeting anti-tank guided missiles, but also turning out to be quite effective as an attritable layer of defense against drones. And here you see probably the ultimate iteration of this, and this is a new release. And General Milner, you might recognize this, maybe not, as a German-built Leopard 1A5, but it barely looks like it. This has been modified with Soviet-style explosive reactive armor, cope cages, netting, steel cable porcupine, a chain skirt, obviously camouflage. They have been parked and widely dispersed and are at a significant standoff from the enemy. And that particular tank survived 52 drone hits over a 5-hour assault before it was driven away. There we are. Human procedural measures. I kind of mentioned this already a little bit. This needs to be acculturated into our psyche as military forces today and moving forward, probably forever. Much like first aid, basic fire safety, use of a fire extinguisher. This is now something that everybody needs, and they need it right from the very beginning, and we'll get to that why. So the use of air sentries. So when a force is moving, whether it's on foot, in vehicles, being static, we need people dedicated to watching for drones. Fieldcraft, how to operate in the field, how to exercise camouflage and concealment at the individual level, right up to the unit level. Rapid reporting and tracking, and the procedural command and control element that embodies. Anti-drone drills, what to do when you see them. Fire, 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 run for the exit, pull the fire alarm handle. We all know how to do this. Why? Because we were taught in grade school. Our privates and our lieutenants, our officer cadets need to learn these anti-drone drills now, not only for deployed operations, but at home that we'll get to. Asymmetric counter UAS. I kind of like this one a lot. So the picture on the left, that's a Ukrainian Soviet era Yak-52 trainer. And in the back seat is a dude with a shotgun. And they're flying around like World War I. It's 1915 all over again. And it is really effective, and they want more of it. On the right is a Hind attack helicopter doing the same thing. But they use everything in between. Mi-2s, Mi-8, Mi-17 family of helicopters that I'm familiar with, having been trained in the Ukraine for Afghanistan, with machine guns. PKM and Mag-58 right up through the minigun, the Gatling gun that we put on, the same Gatling gun that we put on our Griffon helicopters here in Canada. And they're using them to remarkable effectiveness. And in fact, speaking with Major General McKenna, the commander of the 1st Canadian Air Division, just last week, he was remarking that in his briefings, he's now learned, we all knew that they were doing this. We think it's kind of cool. We thought it was this little niche thing. I don't know. The helicopter force in the Ukrainian rear area is now crediting somewhere around 5,500 drones shot down. 5,500 drones shot down using asymmetric counter UAS. Funny enough, I just remembered about this morning while I was shaving, and I had to reach out to a colleague to have him send me this storyboard. We're not a stranger to this either. If you remember, around this time, or a little bit later than this, a little under a year ago, was the G7 summit in Kananaskis. Well, One Wing, and we've got a number of members from One Wing headquarters present here, was tasked with providing helicopters for this. Large helicopters to move national delegations from the Calgary airport to Kananaskis, including President Zelensky, but also other helicopters to move the Canadian Army around, part of their security role, but also the RCMP, as well as a layer of counter-drone and small aircraft interdiction to help enforce the no-fly zone centered on Kananaskis. And for that, and we're not a stranger to that, we had done that before, but we never really had the ability to interdict those threats if indeed they emerged. Well, the world's a different place today than it was during the 2010 Olympics or during the last G7. And so it was determined, no, we need to be ready for things. How do we do this? And as an opening chapter to our counter UAS role, we put RCMP sharpshooters onto Canadian Griffon helicopters. We had the Royal Military College of Canada build us a dozen or so target drones, controllable target drones, and we deployed it all to the Cold Lake Air Weapons Range to train everybody together immediately prior to the G7. So this is not just a good idea that Ukrainians came up with. We've been working on it as well, and funny enough, it was remarkably effective. Every target drone that was sent up, we shot and shot down into the range. So we've talked about so far small, passive, cultural, asymmetric, impressed counter UAS. This is where the juice really is. This is where the metal meets the meat. Electronic and cyber measures, jamming, spoofing, navigation disruption, cyber attack, and disruption of those networks and operators is a layer that has emerged, and it is highly effective and must continue. Directed energy weapons offer the lowest cost per shot counter UAS potential out there, and they are being actively fielded now. That's not just pie in the sky. Between Israel's Iron Beam system, which is fixed right now, about to go mobile, American and Western Leonidas microwave emitters are being fielded as we speak, and not only big countries, U.S., UK, Germany, Israel, but a surprising number of developing countries as well in limited numbers. Kinetic defeat needs to be part of that system as well. So that obviously includes small arms, machine guns, shotguns, etc., heavy machine guns and air defense, but also missiles. And as we've seen now, most recently in the Strait of Hormuz, well, in the Persian Gulf writ large, it's a really expensive way to do it if you're talking about Patriots. But I mentioned before the advanced precision, well, the 2.75-inch rocket, with the advanced precision kill weapon system package installed, they fire the same rocket effectively from fast jets, they fire them from helicopters, and they fire them from ground launchers as well at about $20,000 to $25,000 a shot against a $35,000 Shahed drone. The economics start to make sense and tip back into our favor. The last emerging area that is really interesting and is in widespread use in the Ukraine and now in the Middle East, thanks to Ukrainian help with that problem, is the idea of interceptor drones. These are now drones that are allowed to be even simpler than the drones that they are attacking, that they are countering, because they are the countermeasure. And it's really hard to harden drones against those countermeasures. So 3D printed 300-kilometer-an-hour interceptor drones that either have a kinetic explosive warhead or are just heavier and harder and hit the other drone and break it out of the sky. Those are emerging as very effective, very cost-effective and efficient means of countering drones. All that to say, counter UAS is not a single weapon. It is a system of culture, tactics, technology, training, and even procurement in order to layer those effects and protect our freedom of action. From a Canadian policy implication or Canadian policy factor, Canada clearly recognizes the importance of drones and the importance of counter drones. The Our North Strong and Free defense policy and the defense industrial strategy both acknowledge the need for drones and their countermeasures against them. However, in practice, UAS is outpacing counter UAS. The concern is that drone acquisitions are outpacing this based on an internal bias, I think, I put forward, based on a military person's bias for action. We have essentially our 5, arguably 6 operational functions: command, sense, act, shield, sustain, and another one some people use called generate. anything a military does in any way can effectively be broken down into those categories. And the operational function to act, to do something with initiative is way sexier than to shield. We give medals to the infantry and the armored corps for acting. We don't give a lot of medals to the air defense branch for sitting around and waiting to be attacked. As a result, when we make resourcing decisions, we tend to bias towards things that do stuff, not things that react to things, or not things that react to other things. And as a result, there's a consistent bias towards us. And we've seen this, my research, again, using triangulation, using a broad swath of reporting. The UK Minister of National Defence briefed proudly that over 120 units in the UK Army were training with drones. In the same week that a group of Ukrainian veterans were training with a British unit, and were shocked that the British had no anti-drone nets and had no concept of counter-drone awareness. And that bias, although I used a British example, I put to you, and from reporting and from interviews, exists in Canada as well. That said, there is great reason for optimism. So there is a group formed at the joint level under the Joint Capabilities Command called the Cutter Task Force, the Counter UXS, X meaning air, surface, subsurface, and ground system, Uncrewed Threat Reduction Task Force, the Cutter Task Force, that is standing up today. Right now it's got about 15 people. It will have about 50. The Canadian Army commander has also directed that the Canadian Army Doctrine and Training Center establish a center of excellence for drone and counter-drone warfare, emphasis on counter-drone. And the NRC, DRDC, universities and industry have been executing the Innovation for Defense Excellence and Security experimentation sessions every year, well, 2019, 22, 24, 25, and now 26, spending millions of dollars and dispensing through competition multi-million dollar grants for the development of counter-drone technologies. And we enjoy certain defense industrial strengths in Canada that lend themselves to this role. Artificial intelligence, robotics, quantum sensing. You need to find these drones, and they're actually difficult to see. Electronic warfare, aerospace, and even guided rocket technology with Magellan Aerospace and the CRV-7 rocket made in Winnipeg, out of production now, but available in a guided mode, very similar to the APKWS 2.75-inch rocket. We have a joint challenge, however. The Canadian Army has a different problem in many ways than the Navy, which is different than the Air Force. The Canadian Army's problem is fundamentally a complicated one, but not necessarily very complex. It needs to be able to defend itself against drones in battle. It needs to be able to move around while it does it. It needs short-range air defense, very short-range air defense, electronic warfare, vehicle protection, camouflage, field craft training, acculturation. But it is effectively a problem set that exists in combat. The RCAF doesn't have quite the same problem. Most of our aircraft are relatively immune to drone threats when they're flying and when they're operating. They're at 30,000 feet. They're moving at Mach 1. Integrated air defense, sure. Anti-aircraft missiles and artillery, sure. But drones, not really the problem. The problem the Air Force has with drones is at home, is on bases, where the enemy's objective would be to reduce our ability to field air power. Like we see right here in Russia, where the Ukrainians and their Operation Spiderweb managed to launch a whole bunch of small drones out of sea containers, literally FedExed out to the vicinity of air bases around Russia, and took out a measurable percentage, a significant percentage of their strategic air asset. That could happen in Canada, and that's a challenge. That could happen tomorrow, and Canada has a Defense of North America responsibility within the NORAD umbrella. We're at risk of this right now. This could be an asymmetric threat to Canada from a serious state actor who doesn't have to do it that way, but could. And it's a difficult thing to protect against because you would need to do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, at home, forever. Now, the Air Force is moving out on this. They've acquired counter drone capabilities. And they're standing up a whole new branch of service with a whole new occupation within the branch of service, the RCF Airfield Security Specialists, who are effectively armed security guards with machine guns, light armored vehicles, counter-drone weapons, dogs, the whole bit, all as part of our acquisition of Gen 5 capability with the F-35, the P-8 Poseidon, and other things. So we have the right people, and we're going to have the right equipment that is being onboarded, but it is nevertheless a challenge. The Navy, meanwhile, has the Army's problem to some extent when ships go off, especially in the littoral space near shorelines. But they also have the Air Force's problem in that we have when a warship is tied up in a port, it's very vulnerable. I bet most people didn't know that every time a Canadian warship arrives or departs Victoria or Halifax, they put 50 caliber machine guns on the front and the back, armed with real bullets. And they have forever, because that's when they're vulnerable to arrive and depart. Well, that problem has just got a whole lot worse with the advent of drone and the proliferation of drones. However, they need both sets of solutions because they can't use the same anti-drone capability that they would in warfare out at sea using a Sea-Whiz 30 millimeter Gatling gun cannon firing 2,000 rounds a minute. They can't use that in Halifax Harbor. So they have the Air Force's problems of counter-drone defense in port and the Army's problem, or very akin to the Army's problem, of counter-drone defense at sea. So all that to say, there's some similarities in there, and there's probably some overlaps and efficiencies that can be gained, but the Canadian forces cannot possibly have a one-size-fits-all, even a one-size-fits-all layering of drone defense. The recommendations. All right. First off, we need to rapidly acquire layered counter-UXS capabilities. This must include interceptor drones, low-cost rocket interceptors, directed energy, electronic attack, vehicle protection and camouflage systems, warehousing of defensive construction materials, as well as detection systems. That could be passive electro-optical through noise. Ukrainians have been quite successful in tracking drones using auditory sensors. Active LiDAR and radar, and even quantum covert LiDAR probably offers some great potential in that space. We need to make counter-drone training universal. Counter-drone awareness should begin right at basic training, just like first aid, use of a fire extinguisher, and basic firearm safety. That includes how to react and how to report. Just like receiving a bomb threat on a base, you need to be able to know who to call and what to do and what the actions on checklist are when a quadcopter scorches across Petawawa. Anti-drone field craft should become as routine as camouflage, navigation, or weapons handling. Every soldier, sailor, and aviator needs to know basic drone survival knowledge. Third, we need to continue our major platform recapitalization unabated. We cannot cancel tanks, helicopters, ships, or aircraft on the assumptions that drones will replace them. Instead, we need to design and acquire major platforms to integrate drones, counter-drones, networks, electronic warfare sensors, and autonomous systems. We need to accelerate our drone adoption. We are behind. We still need all of the drones in all classes, but they should augment and not replace conventional forces. Their procurement and adaptation processes must become faster. Again, all the points that Lieutenant Colonel Curry brought up 2 months ago. We should prioritize Canadian counter-UAS innovation, of course. Quantum and electro-optical detection is a great area to do that. Automated drone tracking, friendly UAS deconfliction. We don't want to hit drones with aircraft. That's a problem. That's been a perpetual problem for the adoption of uncrewed systems. We need scalable interceptor drones, directed energy weapons, anti-drone or similar low-cost guided rocket systems. We have expertise in this already. And adaptive systems that can be modified quickly as the threat changes. My conclusions, I think I'm probably beating a dead horse, but they're a permanent fixture in modern warfare. They're not decisive by themselves. Their greatest effect may be that they're forcing us to adapt and expend effort and cost and force structure to survive them. My final message is that the side that merely fields drones will be dangerous. The side that can fight effectively despite enemy drones will be decisive. Drones will shape the future battlefield, but counter-drone capability will determine who can still fight on it. Pending your questions, my briefing ends. Pakel. Softball.
Howard Coombs, RMC and CIDP. Dave, wonderful presentation. Thank you. And I'm sure it's increased everybody's awareness of a thorny modern problem in the battle space. I did have a question, and I might have missed this, or I might have misinterpreted what you're saying.
Okay.
What came across to me was in the CAF context was a grouping of individualized initiatives that are service directed without any centralized coordination or oversight. Did I get that correct?
No, and thank you for the opportunity to clarify. Canadian Joint Capabilities Command recently stood up under Lieutenant General Molstad, a fighter pilot. They are getting their feet underneath them, and this is probably a really great area for them to own. A little bit like space, but probably a little bit simpler and a little bit less broad. They are meant to coordinate and to catalog effectively the areas of overlap, policy coverage. I'll give you an example. If we had a drone flying around the edge of CFB Cold Lake, that'd be a problem. But we don't have policy coverage to go and shoot down drones over the town of Cold Lake. It's not a defense establishment. So they're grappling with that side of it. They're grappling with some of the procurement as well as some of the overlap, because counter-drone Tron guns, I'll call them, electronic warfare cannons that are human portable. Well, that's probably pretty universal. That's one that we could give to the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force and the Special Forces to handle things, right? The system that goes on to that needs to be integrated into a capital warship, that is probably exclusively a Navy problem. So it is a mix. There is a joint component to this that is overseeing and assisting with those other pieces. But the services themselves are the experts in their battle spaces, the experts in their domains. They are force developing these specific the areas of counter UAS that are specifically niche to them. So it is a bit of a blend. There is an oversight. There is a growing recognition. And like I say, a reason for optimism. But the problems are fundamentally a little bit different. If we elevate and try to aggregate that into a single counter UAS office, that would probably give us a less tailored and worse option.
A question from someone who did not get sandwiches. Sir, can you speak to UAS and counter UAS in a harsh Arctic environment?
Sure. So the Arctic is a little bit analogous in some ways to the Indo-Pacific in terms of the tyranny of distance and the range, right? This is where we talk about some of the limitations of drones relates to range. At a certain point, range and payload. At a certain point, if you need to go several thousand kilometers, several thousand miles across open terrain, whether it's a warm ocean or a frozen ocean, your drone just got really, really big, at which point you might as well be in an aircraft. The drone problem in the Arctic is made more difficult for the drone operator in the sense that batteries don't work that great. Now, that's not to say that all drones are going to be electric or are electric. You can have a turbine-fired, jet fueled drone as well. But autonomous systems aren't going to go away. They're going to grow. And it is an Arctic thing. But some of those economies and the value add of uncrewed systems goes away once you start having to transit that far. We already have, our adversaries already have the ability to use one way. I mean, the difference between a drone and a cruise missile is pretty nebulous in a whole bunch of ways. They're meant to kind of do the same thing. Our adversary in the Arctic would probably just use cruise missiles that they already have, and indeed integrated air and missile defense systems, traditional systems, are probably the most likely counter to those things, not counter drone in that space. That said, there's a layer of threat that exists in the Arctic and anywhere else that includes small quadcopters of shorter range, perhaps in a special operations area of interest. So counter drone exists. Counter drone as a requirement exists certainly there as well. But generally speaking, drones don't lend themselves well to either of those environments at that operational strategic level. A tactical problem, certainly in the defense of something, something like the defense of Taiwan, or the close-in defense of a forward operating location for NORAD in the Arctic, certainly. But I wouldn't be particularly concerned about Shahed drones or something of the like transiting long distances at slow speeds in either of those theaters.
Really appreciate the way you laid out the pros and cons. We don't see that very often. Ukraine right now is a lab for that multi-layered system
Yes.
we're talking about, right? And they've been perfecting that for 3 or 4 years. They have 600 manufacturing companies.
Mm-hmm.
We're now we have a defense agreement with Ukraine, and last year we got the first sort of close. So Ukraine now has 601 manufacturing companies, one of which is in Canada, our Canis Aerial Systems. So I'm wondering how do we expand that partnership to plug and to just pull back the whole system knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So they're manufacturing, somehow they're able to manufacture all of the pieces that.
Yep.
And on the other hand, we have sort of a unique advantage in Canada because we've got 300,000 temporary resident Ukrainians.
Mm-hmm.
So how might we connect, that sort of.
Sure.
So is there any conversation about that going on?
So that's probably slightly adjacent to my overall topic, which was a little bit more on the military acquisition, force development, doctrinal argument. From the defense industrial integration, international cooperation side of it. So Ukraine is going to need to rebuild itself, and it's built a massive defense industry. There's probably some value to the Ukrainians in retaining intellectual property rights and capacity to be the gatekeeper for some of that, understanding that it is something that they're currently very willing to exchange for help with their today problem, which is a massive army that they've been grinding against for a better part of a decade in a lot of ways, and really kinetically in the last 4 years. So there's probably a window of opportunity in there. We've got really friendly relations. The Ukrainian government really likes Canada. We've been staunch supporters of them throughout this fight, as we should be. And so I think there's great opportunity there. Just because you're from Ukraine doesn't mean you're technically literate and able to, but I'm sure within that 300,000 person diaspora, Ukrainian diaspora in Canada, there are individual linkages in that space. And I think right now, when you're that close to when we've been grinding they have been grinding that hard on the coal face like this, a lot of it probably comes down to relationships and knowing people. One of my RMC classmates has been quite prominent in that space in making those business linkages and aid linkages and other things. So I think that it holds great promise. The Ukrainians are the best at this. Certainly both the use of drones, but again, if I had $1 to spend in Ukraine on buying their drone technology or buying their counter drone technology, I would spend it on the counter drone technology. I think that's where the emphasis should be. If we had no drones at all, but we had a bulletproof layered armor, we would just fight the enemy the old way. Yep. I understand. But fundamentally, it's partner with. If I had the choice to expend resources, this is fundamentally my argument. Spend the resources on counter drone. The rest of it is relatively. It's not. It will be a blend. We should have them as drones as well, but they are additive and compensatory. They're not substitutive to conventional systems.
If we wanted to explore that opportunity, how would we go?
It's a great question. Certainly there are resources online to include like the ideas, like I say, the ideas experimentation window. entering that window through entering that world through that window probably, and the linkages that would make. I'm afraid I'm not an expert in sort of the defense industrial. Yeah. I'm not an expert in defense industrial, capacity building, but I think it holds tons of water. The idea, they're the best at it. Probably the most pragmatic at it as well. It's probably highly effective and not too expensive versus going down traditional defense industrial pathways.
Lieutenant Colonel Nick Curry. So first off, I think the biggest thing that I took out of this was that he acknowledged the Apache is the far superior helicopter.
Couldn't agree more.
A year of work, but I'm glad I got through it. So understanding that, yes, GDP spend increase, focus on a lot of different aspects. What are the top systems, technology that you think needs to be focused on for counter drone, future? Knowing that, it's going to be limited. So what are those like top 3 things that you think that really should be the focus?
Globally or for Canada?
Either one.
So globally, it seems that the most bang for buck, the most potential exists in directed energy weapons. Once they're built, once they're adapted, and as they gain effectiveness and resilience, it's pennies per shot, right? And they can be the type of effector that you're using now. You're using trons through the airwaves. You're using lasers. You can probably automate that whole thing because that's the ability of that system to negatively impact civilian infrastructure, civilians, hurt other people is probably extremely limited. Not saying you wouldn't like zap some old guy's pacemaker. I'm sure that would be a bad thing. It's not without risk, but it's certainly less bad than spraying all over Kyiv with 30 millimeter, 50 millimeter anti-aircraft cannon fire. So I think it also promises to be the most effective, or has the potential to be the most effective. AI-enabled sensing that is able to observe, track, target hundreds, huge drone swarms potentially, and then affect them either with a big blast of electromagnetic energy or short shots of lasers at the cost of like an uptick in your utility bill. The challenges with that technology are it requires large amounts of stable electrical power that lend itself better to defending fixed installations than mobile systems like tanks or aircraft. But we're not that far off. As you're well aware, the DIRCM system, for example, the Canadian Chinook helicopters are equipped with this. The direct infrared countermeasures system on a helicopter has a ball on it. And when the helicopter's sensors detect an incoming missile and they can see the spectral analysis, they do a spectral analysis on the emissions from the missile's rocket motor, and it can see that and says there's a missile inbound, and it will track that missile that's moving twice the speed of sound, and a ball turret will spin around and shoot that missile in the face with a laser, blinding it. Now, that's not a very powerful laser in that case, but if we have the technology to do that, it's an evolution to achieve the technology to burn out that seeker head or otherwise damage that incoming threat. Or the aircraft will, instead of launching off chaff or flares to blind or fool that missile and spoof that missile to shoot after to veer after the flare instead of the helicopter, the helicopter could just dispense counter drones and send an AI-enabled, fully autonomous. Because in this case, its job is to go and hit some other drone. Who cares if it's fully autonomous? In fact, I'd prefer if it were. I'd prefer if I didn't even know about it and it just left as soon as it thought something was coming. There's no ethical, should be very little ethical concern associated with fully autonomous countermeasures in that regard. So all that to say, I think directed energy and weapons, whether they are microwave or laser, probably offer the most bang for buck into the future. And then on a different level of that spectrum is counter drone interceptors. Because again, 3D printed, and they don't have to be as smart as or even as connected, or even connected at all as the drones that they're there to hit. I think those are probably the two spaces that offer the most potential, notwithstanding all of those other layers that need to be there as well, including mass proliferation of shotguns with tungsten buckshot ammunition optimized for drones.
Okay, one final question.
Sir.
Great presentation, Dave, and augmented very well Nate's presentation. My concern is that we're so focused on the Ukraine. And I mean, I don't think the Ukraine has got the lessons for the future battlefield. I mean, right now it's an attrition warfare. I think we've learned a lot from the drones. What we didn't talk a lot about was this recent war in the Gulf.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, but you know, we've watched the U.S. expend billions and billions and billions of dollars, which I don't think they're doing very well keeping up with it.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I think they've needed to slow down and regroup as they get ready, and they bring another carrier battle group into the battle space. But so the lessons from that, you know, I mean, the Ukraine for me it's you know, there's some good lessons there, and there's some good lessons because we'll, you know, are we going to fight in Europe? Probably. The Russians are going to continue to be a nuisance, and they'll be dumb enough to probably do something again. But I think a lot of big lessons have been learned, and just, you know, what drones were able to do in the Gulf was just huge. And so I think I mean, I think that's an important bunch of lessons. And I don't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, sir. Yeah. So I alluded to it a little bit, that Patriot missiles at a couple $1 million a shot are a terrible way to shoot down Shahed drones that are worth $35,000. Not to mention not just the cost, but the attrition of magazine depth, the number of Patriots that the West now has available to it to defend against a major war against a peer competitor like, let's say, China or Russia. So you're absolutely right. What's interesting is the Americans and everybody else have been staring at this drone threat, and the Shahed is not a new thing. Indeed, they've been countering Shahed drones in the Middle East already for years and years and years. And yet everybody's buying acting things and not shielding things. There's still been a bias towards it was as though this was a big surprise. The Shahed drone was literally invented and is mass produced in Iran. And we went to war. We, the West, the United States and Israel in this case, went to war in Israel, ignoring this massive stockpile and technical prowess in fielding these cheap, attritable surges and pulses and surges of drone capability out of Iran. So it kind of signals my point that we're focusing on some of the wrong stuff. To your point on taking false lessons from Ukraine, I agree. There's a lot of really important lessons, and certainly adapting to drones is one of them. But one of the lessons that have come specifically from Ukraine, and it took me a long time as Commander One Wing within the Canadian Army and sitting at Army Council to try to inoculate us as best I could against the idea that, well, nothing can fly within 10 kilometers of the forward line of owned troops. Air power is dead. It's all drones, baby. It's not. It can't be. That's a false lesson. We are not going to fight the Russians, should we have to, knock on wood. We're not going to fight the Russians the way the Ukrainians have to fight the Russians. Why? Because we're NATO. We've got all sorts of capability and all sorts of access to technology and skills and synchronization and integration that the Ukrainians unfortunately don't have, and we can't give them for the nuclear threat. So there are false lessons absolutely associated with that. And again, though, to include reliance on drones, the anti-access area denial problem of the South China Sea is not particularly ameliorated by the advent of drones. We still have a problem of trying to penetrate and get hundreds of miles past into that threat zone that having a pilot on board or not doesn't help you with. So we still need high-end, exquisite, bespoke super expensive systems in order to accomplish those things, and they're not going away. So I think there's a sense of false economy, especially in defense adjacent informed people that think that there's free chicken as a result of this, and there isn't.
And with that, please join me in thanking Colonel Forbes.